Hello, my astrology friends. This is Lada from astrolada.com. Today, I'm here with an old friend and colleague of mine, Philip, and has some really interesting insights that he's discovered about the upcoming full moon in Capricorn. He kind of blew me away like a month ago. We were talking. He said, "You know what I've discovered? I want to tell you." And Phil is here to take over with some fascinating information that pertains actually to what is happening. This full moon is so connected to what has been happening for the last year and a half. Hello, Phil.
Hey Lada, thank you so much for holding space and inviting me back to be able to present this information. It's jolly exciting stuff, and it allows us to know where we are at in time. I found that when we're dealing with our position as individuals, whether it's a self or humanity, the best way to synthesize the future is to galvanize the past. Because as a Capricorn myself, it was that I actually learnt the drums, as Capricorns do, in earlier days. Before they let me on the drums, they said, you've got to learn timing and you've got to learn how to come into the right part of the song. And so you need to know the past and you need to know the future to know where you are at in the hymn sheet.
Beautiful.
And this is what astrology offers us.
Beautiful comparison. And you said that your sun falls on the exact same degree as the degree of the full moon that is happening on the 24th of June in Capricorn.
Yes, indeed, which is very exciting. I mean, we do have these new moons and full moons on our natal positions every 18 months or so. We'll have the opportunity to discover that these full moons are appearing where they last were. So basically, this full moon echoes back to a new moon eclipse, a new moon solar eclipse that took place 18 months prior. And it's only, what would you say, how frequently is it that we have a new moon or a full moon on our natal moon or sun?
Sorry?
How regularly is it that we have a new moon or a full moon on our natal sun or moon?
It's very rare. I don't know.
For it to be an eclipse is even more rare.
Yeah.
So I knew myself that actually in 2019, upon the ingress of Jupiter into Capricorn, joining Saturn and Pluto, this was a big deal. You and I, Lada, we did a video back in 2017 about all the transits that we were going to be experiencing. You and your whole Astrolada team each featured a different aspect of that which we were going to be experiencing. And we talked about it in 2017 to give us a real big heads up about it all. And so you and I, we featured the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which would happen 2 weeks after the eclipse, which would take place at 3 degrees of Capricorn. And so what we're going to do now is look at that chart, because this is lining us up to know more greatly about what we are coming conscious of at this time. And so if you allow me just to pull this chart up and we can have a little look.
You're saying that eclipse that happened when the coronavirus exploded, when it first came, basically it was the eclipse that triggered the whole pandemic, whatever, hysteria. Is the current eclipse that will happen at the same degree, it's not an eclipse, sorry, full moon, it's like a conclusion for it?
I would go as far as to say less than a conclusion, but a opportunity to feel clarity. Because that's what the moon offers. It's translucent, it's water, it's how we feel, and it's taken a long time to decipher how we feel about this and how we can, it's quite a confrontation with self, with a spiritual way, because we can look at the world scene and that story, but we can also look at how these situations have given us the opportunity to gaze more internally on ourselves. And this is what this experience is unfolding for us on a spiritual level, the finest opportunity to connect more deeply with ourselves and one another. And this is what I would like to show on a more beautiful harmonic level, how some of these more intimidating experiences that we've been living through has offered us grace.
But I do believe also because the new moon eclipse that triggered this whole situation happened at the same degree that the full moon will be now. And the full moon shows like a culmination of something. It's like the furthest it can go, the furthest it can go bigger. And after that, there should be, like after culmination, there is declination. So there is a bit of that energy, I suppose.
So you could say maybe it's like a magic spell that was wielded across humanity, and that is now losing its power. People are seeing through the facade. People like Doctor Who are hearing beyond the curtain, or seeing that's just that's not just Doctor Who, it's the Wizard of Oz. That's the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. He's a frail old man. These corporations, these governments, they're just held up like a house of cards, and they're revealing themselves with their demonstrative kind of denotion, well, what the implications that they're trying to share with us. And this is the thing, it brings it, when it talks about emotions, when we talk about our health, it can be very it makes us feel very inferior straight away. We want to play safe, we want to ensure that we're doing the right thing by ourselves and by one another. And so this is a very psychological game which we are learning to, in a sense, disengage from, I feel, because our feelings don't lie. Yeah, it feels iffy. Yeah, it's uncomfortable, some of these situations. But the thing is, we talk about covering of the voice, truth, or mask, faith. We're talking about our most glorious parts. This is Venetian, this is Taurian, our mouth, our lips, and the ability to express ourselves and connect in a conscious way is becoming much more autonomous. When we listen to these rules, these directions, they are of the mind. And we have to classify our evidence of mind and results. And actually, spirit and emotions ask us to go on feeling, which are devoid of light and illusion, because feeling really reveals the truth. This is why we see that we listen to something and we get intuitively guided, like clairaudience. And so what we're doing is actually, I feel these transits have been guiding us, especially with the ingress of Jupiter into Pisces and all of these planets trailing through Cancer. We're actually learning to trust into our emotions much more. And we can see as we go through these couple of charts how we have had the undermining of the matriarchal emotional flow, even the mother, or the ability to go into the nurturing of our interior condition. Before, it would be like, why are you late for work? We don't care, just get to work. And now it's like, hey, the best job, the best boss, if you work for a boss, would be to say, do you need an extra day off? Because there's no point in you working if you feel uncomfortable. We want you at your best so you feel that you can do your greatest work. So this is the kind of paradigm shift that we've had since the Great Conjunction, with regards to emotions being honoured a lot more, not being within earthy trigons. Now that the Great Conjunction was in airy trigons, we see that our emotional houses, our emotional signs are falling into different houses with regards to the first place of that conjunction. So this paradigm shift of honouring the interconnected nature of us is something that we're being schooled on, and our interior condition as we slowly move out of this patriarchal system. So this is exciting. Should I share the chart?
Yes, carry on.
Great. Well, firstly, what I'm going to share is the eclipse, which is a new moon solar eclipse. And this is very interesting. As I say, we looked at it, I was aware of it coming on because it was actually happening on my birthday. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. You don't often get an eclipse on your birthday. But more to the point, it was the first time that we have had Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter in Capricorn for 735 years. So us astrologers looking on at this energy, we're very aware that this is almost a reset for our traditions. This is a change for how we support ourselves. It's a shift for what we put our faith into. And this is a process which isn't going to be done overnight. This is the beginning of cycles and the ending of cycles. A cycle shall only begin and end once two planets, two deities, two archetypes meet. And as you see in this chart, Jupiter and Saturn are far from meeting. They wouldn't actually meet until the following December, almost a whole year later. And that was the Great Conjunction that took place at 0 degrees of Aquarius. But this, 4 degrees, which is 4 degrees of Capricorn, is 1 degree away from where our next full moon is. So this is very, very powerful for us. You see that Jupiter was 1 degree away from this new moon solar eclipse that we had in Capricorn. This is 2 weeks before Saturn would catch up with Pluto, and that was on the 12th, I believe, of January. That's just like when they did the Wuhan announcement. It wasn't anything new. That was very prepared. You could say that this was like a gunpowder plot. They had to put all the gunpowder into Capricorn, and it was just ready to go. And this is, in a sense, the fuse that was going on, because the full moon would be obviously in Cancer. I think that was on the 10th, 2 days before the conjunction of Saturn and Pluto, which takes place every 35 years. And so these are interesting times that we've lived through. It was a South Node solar eclipse, the South Node working through Capricorn, deconstructing and letting go of things that aren't actually there to serve us at moving forward. And these are about belief systems. If the South Node's right there next to Jupiter, which rules Sagittarius, the sign before Capricorn, the collective subconscious belief systems that give us security. You could say that Sagittarius is the 12th house of all these governmental structures, the World Health Organization. I mean, many of us didn't know who they were, but we all know who they are these days. And so what we're learning is actually we can find that we are like the devil card in the tarot deck. We're not subjected to these things unless we are engaging with these things. The devil card represents actually that the chains are so loose that we can untangle ourselves from such situations. And I feel like this is what Saturn is always asking us to do. It's to become Saturnian, to become dignified within our own authorization as the author of our own script. And this means disengaging from self-sabotaging relationships or abusive situations. It doesn't always just have to be a governmental structure. It could be a bad diet or routine, or even a way of thinking and communicating, which we're able to let go of through the process of these transits, which are very much allowing us to advance ourselves at these times. And so the investigation in this chart is the North Node Rahu in Cancer, and this is the new moon. And so the investigation is asking us to come within to support and structure ourselves. The moon, our nearest, our dearest, our interior guidance system. Saturn, well, it's our farthest example that we set. When we set those boundaries, when we set the standards, when we set the scene, that is really setting a standard for the manifestation which we're going to be going through. So if we're going into bad diets, or if we feel that we have to go on the dole because we think that's going to support us, sometimes we have to, sometimes we do have to. But if we can find that we're not doing jobs that we don't enjoy, which make us feel less than, that aren't giving us enthusiasm, this is something we can disengage from and find our own gifts, our own joy, and our own talents. And the fallout from this scenario has gifted many people more time to go introspective. The whole world would go onto lockdown 3 months later. And we're going to look at that chart in just a bit. But before I do, what I would like to do is to present the very last time that Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter were together in Capricorn, because this chart says a lot. It's about the truth which has been hidden from us. And this is to deal with, as you say, the opportunity for us to disengage, but also this COVID scenario, world pandemic or plandemic, control. There's an agenda 2130, which is very interesting. And this is like where we're going to have the opposition of Saturn and Jupiter in 2030. And this is so interesting because I'll pull this off and then we're going to the next one, because it is actually, I've got to give a shout out to a fellow researcher. His name's the Black Sheep Researcher, and he has a YouTube channel called What the Flock. Flock, like a flock of sheep. And so basically this gentleman researched and found out that it's the Vatican's 100th centurion birthday on the year 2029. And that year, it falls onto the 1st of April, which is April Fool's Day, which is the day of Janus. Which is really the Bank of Genoa. It is like the Vatican. It is like all of these oligarchical kind of secret societies that are keeping the world temple alive behind the scenes, if you will. And so what happened was many, many years ago, like as I've seen you do some great work on the channel, talking about the Cathars and how Christ consciousness was honored by the empresses and the emperors of the land. And they'd farm the land and they loved the land, and it gave us a rich joy, golden frequency of the Christ energy, because we were doing what we loved and all of these great things. But since we've become more reliant on governmental structures, even just Walmart and your Sainsbury's and your Tesco's, we don't need to go into farming because the convenience of Amazon and all of these different things, right? It made the world smaller. And this was actually something that would have to be done very slowly over the course of the centuries between 1284, which is the chart I'm about to show, and the present time. The world was industrialized, especially so much through the earthy trigon, the past 200 years. But it was actually that there was a kind of different armies hired within these times to start the wars, and they would conquer and pillage like the rich pagan traditions of the land, especially in the likes of Finland and France, all over Europe, who were all astrologers and these types of things. It was the norm. And yet this would get beaten down and the traditions would become more oral, word of mouth, and more taboo. And they'd manipulate with the stories of changing the narrative in the Bibles, and even to make you feel demonic if you were even believing in something interior. And so we lost this whole gazing in, and we become patriarchal, basing all of our evidence on Saturnian things outside of us.
Capricornian, yeah. Saturnian. So you were saying that
Yeah.
this whole thing started when the Saturn, Jupiter, South Node, Pluto were again in Capricorn, like the year, like in the 13th century. I remember you told me that this is when the banking system also started for the first time. And I remember in 2017 when you were talking about the year 2019 and 20, when they were all be together in Capricorn again, you said this will be the time when they start deconstructing those institutions that for 700-800 years slowly in a hierarchical top-down way basically started controlling everything, which is very Capricorn, hierarchical top-down pyramidal structure, and everything is controlled and governed, exactly everything that you were talking about. And you said from 2019, 2020, when they get together, the decomposition of that starts. It's like the ending of a cycle, or wasn't it something like that? I remember.
Yes, I feel like it's the flip reverse. We're going to play time backwards in a way, because time's a loop, and the prophecy, as you mentioned, these are prophesized times, because the looping happens in micros and macros. Like we play out our smaller stories all the time, like the hiccups and things, the startups. We have the opportunity every time we have a Mercury retrograde to clear things up, or Venus retrograde to change things. And so these are our personal cycles, but these are extended humanitarian cycles where people who feel that they can, in a sense, control the world or guide the world along their way, they take the reins, because after money and after the next thing is control. And so this agenda 2130, which we've got going on now, to just go back to that, is actually very interesting, because the year after, in 2130, is the 101 anniversary of the Vatican. And it falls on the 21st of April, which is the first degree of Taurus, either 0 or 1, depends on the Gregorian calendar, which is also Queen Elizabeth's birthday, or the Elizabeth the Queen, whatever her name is. And so it's interesting because this is a very royal position for the beginning of Taurus, the beginning of Earth, it's the beginning of value. And it's the last possible date that you can have Easter fall on. I mean, this is interesting. I see Easter as Venus, and the Halloween is the West Star. We just don't call it West Star. We call it like the holiday of the dead here in Mexico is what they call it, right? And so it's very beautiful to be able to honor the deconstruction in the fall and the resurrection, or the spring in the Eastern time, Easter time. Anyway, so it's interesting that they've taken these holidays and claimed them for other things within the church, because they're not astrologically sound with regards to how we are celebrating them, are they? In these current times. And so it's very interesting. So I'm going to now share the chart of what was going on in 1284, because this is something which we looked at the time. It's one of the most whopping charts I've seen in my life. It's a humdinger of a chart. And so allow me to show you the synchronicities between this and the eclipse that we had back in 2019 at the very end of that year. You see that actually this time it's Rahu. This is a big thing. K2 was in 2019, more recently, just before we entered 2020.
Okay, so because it was with Rahu in 2084, it was the beginning of something new. Rahu is to manifest something, Ketu is to deconstruct and release. Okay, I see where you're coming from here.
Yes, and it's insatiable. The power grab, dun, 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 dun. It can just go for more and more and more. This Rahu, it doesn't have a capacity for how much it can devour. It's a head and it's a direction. And so this is the trajectory cast into this spell, into this chart that we have cast for this time, which was actually, funnily enough, Gregorian calendar, it's a day before The last one took place on the 25th of December. Obviously, it depends where you are in the world, doesn't really matter. But the point is that this happened on the 24th, both of which are days after the winter solstice. Well, this was 10 days after the winter solstice, you see, according to the sun, which is ridiculously far along in Capricorn. That shows how much the times have changed, huh? Because normally the winter solstice would be 0 degrees of Capricorn. And if the sun's 10 degrees in it, that shows the slippage and the falsity within the Gregorian calendar in itself. We weren't using the Gregorian calendar back then. We didn't even use English. English was only invented by John Dee, the astrologer of Queen Elizabeth, in the 1500s, halfway between now and then. This is so interesting, right? And so how this would happen is that we had so many different stories told. Back in 1284, there was the tale told of the Pied Piper, which is that actually if you tell a lie big enough, if you tell a lie sensational enough, if you tell a lie with enough hooks, then you can get people to believe anything. And this is what they were practicing back then, yes.
Well, they're
And
still doing it, the Pied Piper, but now the Pied Piper is losing its power.
yes, but then the Pied Piper was rich and strong, and it was actually in the year 1284 that the mythology of the Pied Piper was put into a stained glass window into the Cathedral of Notre Dame. And funnily enough, it was actually 9 months before, in 2019, I feel, that actually the Cathedral of Notre Dame,
the eclipse, yeah.
Same year. So the omen says that's the end of the power of the Pied Piper, of the leader, of the media. Yes.
It burned down. The Notre Dame burned on the 14th of April, 2019. And I remember so many people said this is a great sign. But I was first scared because I was like, okay, that's symbolism of religion. But no, Notre Dame, the Catholic Church, is a symbolism of enslavement, of distorting the freedom and the real belief system of the world. And you said the Pied Piper story was in the year of the great eclipse in Capricorn was actually built into the Notre Dame. Wow, I got goosebumps. Fascinating.
Yes. Well,
so the Pied Piper is burning, is falling down. This is the time.
Yes, it's a bit like London Bridge is burning down, burning, falling. I don't get the words right. Forget about it. But anyway, so this is interesting. We don't see Jupiter in the sky right now in this chart. Let's just diagnose this chart, and then we can go into a bit more of the chat about it. Jupiter's beneath the beams. It's assumed by the sun, and so anything can be easily assumed when you follow the leader and actually don't follow self. And so this is what this is really conducting. It was like we need to follow the leader in these situations. We need to be led. We need to be shepherded. We need a guide, because we are losing what was opposite. And that's this moon energy. The moon was a full moon. This was what we just looked at. The first chart was a new moon. That was the sun and the moon coming together. This is actually a full moon. They're 180 degrees apart from one another. And so this is a full moon in Cancer, the moon's home sign, with K2 by the moon. This is letting go of the internal reference point. This is letting go of the honoring of emotions. This is letting go of the honoring of the feminine or the subtle spiritual body, which is what I prefer to call it these days. And so this is a recognition of that we've all got a subtle spiritual body and we've all got a physical body. Both are equal in the honoring. And this is our divine masculine and feminine. And that we are here to honor.
So that's when the weakening of the feminine became, and the patriarchal structures in Capricorn became more powerful. But when it happened in 2019 and 20, the opposite eclipses is showing the opposite now.
Yes, very much so. And we can just look at how much this was really deconstructing our internal. If Jupiter is assumed underneath the beams of the sun, this means that the 12th house of Capricorn was also shrouded within disarray, the collective and the belief system shrouded within a mystique or some kind of illusion. Jupiter also rules Pisces, where Chiron is, and it was trining the moon and sextile the sun at the time of this full moon. But look at it also. We talked about how the last one in 2019 was just 13 days or something like this before the conjunction of Saturn-Pluto, which happens every 35 years. But in this chart, it had just happened. Saturn had just gone over Pluto that same week. And so that's so interesting. And you can see that actually Mercury, which rules the media, It's the messenger. Was in a conjunction with Saturn and Pluto to the degree. You know, they're a degree apart. And there's a trine to Neptune at this point, which is in the media sign of Virgo. So intriguing that. Not only that,
So it's like
Uranus,
a big sign, the narrative for the next 800 years will be tightly controlled and regulated, whatever the narrative is.
especially by gaslighting and manipulation through what would be different various religions, whether they were spiritual religions or that of the science, which would be later the more modern situations which we're living through now. So we can see that also with Uranus here, that's kind of like our genius. And our genius is actually so attached to our emotions. The highest echelon of intelligence, as far as I can perceive, is emotional intellect, because it's consideration and compassion of the highest echelon. And there's all types of different types of intelligence, and we must learn to honor them all. Even the technology is something which we are having a relationship now. It's part of ourselves. And so we must learn to harmonically connect with that in an emotionally intelligent way as well, if you ask me. But this Uranus is directly opposite Mercury. I've got a Mercury-Uranus conjunction. So this is like saying, hey, I'm cutting the higher mind from the lower mind. There's going to be this opposition and not recognizing it with the moon and the Ketu in the same sign as Uranus at this form. And it's like letting go of connection to the genius or the pineal gland. So what was famous about this time in Wuhan and what's similar?
Uranus rules the pineal gland?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think there's a few things that be connected
Yeah.
to the pineal gland. You can say that actually the hippocampus, which is ruled by Jupiter, is directly connected to the pineal gland. The hippocampus, the water horse, that's where the dimethyltryptamine or the spirit molecule secretes from. This is the holy secretion. And so we can also say that is Venus, the Christ. We can also say that it's the inner sun. And so the anatomy is very, very deeply connected inside of our brain to various different parts of our bodies. But Uranus is the vagus nerve, it's the lymph system, it's the thyroid. And so it's so directly connected to our, you could say out the box, but I like to feel like it's deeply integrated within us. And so this is a very interesting chart. And we must mention also Venus was retrograde then, conjunct Mars. And so that's a journey through the underworld for us all with regards to the structures that we were being put into at that period and how we would identify and be receptive to the changes made at that time. So humdinger of a chart, what more can you say apart from what some other things that were going on at that time? And this was actually that there is this thing with regards to sex trafficking and all of these types of human trafficking that's also a part of this situation which we're awakening to. And this has been in the world news a lot since the lockdown last year. It's been coming to our attention. It's not the most brilliant feeling. It's something you touch on for a little bit and then you move back away from and go back into the high vibrational frequencies. But to be aware is to be empowered. And so there's been lots of different things going on with the oligarchs of the world and how we are, in a sense, pawns to a metaphysical game that we are not privy to. And so really, these are the things which are coming back into our awareness now, especially in a sense, a cover-up with regards to this COVID situation, because it's a very, actually something to be grateful for if you look out from the most zoomed out perspective, because we don't want to shake everyone into a sudden awakening if they're not prepared. I mean, some of us are still, I am not prepared to receive all of the truths that are in the world right now, and I'm sure you don't want to hear about them all either, Lada, or anybody of you watching. But what we do find out is at the right time for us, because it's what we can digest at that time. And so what we're learning as humanity is so much about all of the different things that have been going on in society. We see it within the royal family, we see it within like the Epsteins, and we see it within all of these different things. And this is about honoring going into situations that make us feel less than, obviously, more and more, and choosing to disengage from things that are proving to themselves to be untrustworthy. The reason I mentioned the sex trafficking is because it's been a war on the pineal gland, Lada. It's been a war on our own Christ consciousness and the connection to our own internal connection to the lands, how we marinate into this opportunity to not be in a patriarchy. In the sense, even the idea of love and falling in love with another person and idealizing them to the point that we don't put enough eggs in our basket, and even wanting for a masculine energy to come into a woman. This is very patriarchal. And if the holiest spiritual practices teach about the tantric union, where you actually learn to create from a holy perspective, which is something of the great art which we are remembering and has been forgotten since way before those mystery schools were practicing it back then. Does this all align with the kind of things which you have been researching? Because it feels like to me, this is the truth of the Kappas. This is the truth of our own immune system. This is the truth of the Christ consciousness, which is within us all. The temple is our human body, and the crystal is within it. And it's the tear of Ra, or it's actually in our tiara. It's right here. And so the many, many tears which we're shedding right now are root to our salvation, even though sometimes they bring us to, our emotions. That's the only way that we get to dismantle each of these surface layers and come back to our truth, which is very fertile for us. How do you align with these things before I bring up the next chart of our more academic journey?
How fascinating. Carry on. I'm enjoying.
Thank you. It's very, me, I'm like, as I said, Mercury-Uranus conjunction, bits and pieces all over the place. So thank you, audience, for sticking with us on this journey. What we're going to do now is fly back into the academics as we actually pull ourselves back to the current moment. And so, as we said, back in 1284 was the last time we had Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter together. And yet it was actually when these, when back in Babylonian times, about 4,000 years, that they were as tight as they would eventually come in 2020. Because in October, November, they came all within 6 degrees towards in that last decan of Capricorn. But to get there, you'd have to lock the world down. And so interesting, we would have to see what would take us to that next part. And so the world went on lockdown.
It might be a plan that's been unfolding since Babylonian time, actually, when they last were.
Yes, I completely agree with you. And I know that the other astrologers, like we've got to give the other astrologers credit, like Kay Patcher and the Leo King. They are the only two, apart from yourself and myself, that I've seen talking about this deep, deep truth. And so props to you guys. Because you're all fantastic Leo people, and you're all talking about the nature of stars, which is what we all truly are. And it kind of lost our way with regards to that when we go into these more crusty, traditional kind of governmental systems and that, which don't educate us on our spirituality. We've been devoid of connection to spirituality, and this is what we're remembering through these times. It's not like a sudden thing, like we want to get out of this place as well. I think this is very important. The body's where we want to be. 3D is the place that we are here to create. We are the janitors of it. We are the Christ-conscious offspring of the earth. And so it's a gift for us to be here. As a spirit, we probably would find that we have to do a lot of work to find the opportunity to manifest a body. And so we could be grateful for this opportunity to get clear on ourselves and to heal this place with all of our personal relationships to all things. And so here is the new moon, which we experienced in Aries. And if you notice, it's at 4 degrees. And so it squares the new moon, which we had 3 months earlier. It's a cardinal sign. Capricorn's the beginning of winter. And so Aries is the beginning of spring. Lovely square between those new moons. But what we've had since then is that actually in that new moon at the end of 2019, the south node, K2, was at about 8 degrees of Capricorn. It's gone further back to 3 degrees now, which means it's obviously gone over the one which we experienced 735 years ago. I imagine many transits have gone on since then, and even the nodes have passed over it every 18 and a half years since then. But it's still an activation, because this new moon would be to square the nodes. And in karmic evolutionary astrology, any aspect in a natal chart squaring the nodes is helping us move from our south node of experience and wisdom, our treasure chest, if you will, and get to the north node, 180 degrees. We use the thing that's in between, the 90 degrees thing that's squaring the nodes, to help us get to the north node. And so we want to make it to Cancer, which is where we're moving, the summer solstice now. I mean, there was one between this chart and then, but we're actually recording this a week before the summer solstice now, and it's just a few days before that full moon. And so this new moon, square the nodes, was conjunct Chiron and the Black Moon Lilith. I haven't got Black Moon Lilith on this chart here, but Black Moon Lilith was also there right next to Chiron. So they were all together squaring the nodes. This means that this new moon cycle, which lasts more than 28 days, as we know, these things echo on into future, as we are experiencing and as we're explaining. But this new moon, which is ruled by Mars, Aries, ruled by Mars. Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So we've got an exalted dispositor for the new moon squaring the nodes in the conjunction of Chiron and Lilith. And Mars is next to Pluto and Jupiter. This is a humdinger. How powerful. I mean, the world's never gone on lockdown before. And so what we would see is that our kids were pulled out of school. The Elizabeth, the Queen of England, who rules the coin, said that she was going to actually go back to Balmoral, or whatever that means is an omen. I'll say that again. Whatever that means is an omen. Oh, man, that was meaningful, because the same day in the Vatican, the Pope, which is meant to be the last Pope, he went on to lockdown as well. And they did some kind of motif. And this was very interesting metaphysically. It's a bit like a ritual, what was going on with regards to this lockdown. And the funny thing is, Saturn had just gone into Aquarius. It does that every 28 years. But it was preparing for what would be this new normal. Normal, if you look into Latin, is the word square. Saturn is a square cube. And so what we're looking at is here to say that these are the changing of times as we're preparing for actually Jupiter to catch up with Saturn. Saturn through this year was going to make regress back into Capricorn. Obviously, Jupiter would also do its retrograde, but they would catch up 9 months later. 9 months from the winter, 9 months from the spring equinox would be the winter solstice, where Saturn and Jupiter would meet at 0 degrees of Aquarius, which is where Saturn was in this chart. And so this is, in a sense, laying the paving as we exit earthy trigons. How can we still control the next one? Because they've already lost it, because we have already won it. Because in a sense, this is the coming out of the box. This is the genius coming into its own conscious realization. Us as individuals and humanity can self-organize beyond the governmental structures which have, for the majority, for the most part, kept us under padlock and key for many, many centuries. And so the only way would be to the last Pied Piper trick. And that would be to spread a rumor that was demoralizing for every identification. It could be about health, conjunct Chiron. It could be about the repressed truth with Lilith there. And yet people would feel repressed and want to act out upon this as it would fall out. I mean, I instantaneously wasn't keen about lockdown. I know that many people weren't. And we all lead our own way. And what we're learning now is that although we still all lead our own way, there's so many divides. Hello, whether it's nationalism, ageism, sex and gender, maybe it's even your sexuality. It could be your class, which you're divided by, or your babble, because your language. But actually, when you're in a situation on public transport, maybe you're going traveling or something like that, and you come into a connection of people who do speak a different language, and you just give up. You just don't, there's no chance of you being able to relate on that level at first. But what you can do is recognize sometimes that there might be universal things that connect us. There are things that we can all recognize that bring us together on an emotional level. And so what we're learning about is the interconnected nature that we all share beyond the division which we are all here in comparison to. Especially as it was last week when I contacted you, Lara, that we had the opposition of Mars to Pluto. And so this is the first of many oppositions to Pluto. But particularly, it was only last week or so that we had the fallout of what this is. And we have many different layers of this fallout taking place, because what we have had now is putting our faith, Jupiter was still in Capricorn at this time, putting our faith into to identify with security, putting our faith into identification with the health organization or governments that advise us. I mean, I've turned that stuff off a long time ago, and I still encourage and implore people to go with their resonance, to go with what feels best for them. Look at Venus in this chart, trine in Mars, trine in Jupiter, and Pluto. People would be oh so receptive to this because they value authority, and that's under meaning. If we're going into contracted, contorted scenarios, this means that we are each squeezing ourselves into abusive situations where we feel less than, and we can feel it. Venus, in harmony with this, means we can feel it. We lose our minds and come to our senses. We can recognize our internal guidance system once more. This is the beauty of now. This is the healing of now. And this is a very powerful time indeed. How do you feel about it, Lada?
I just find it very enjoyable to listen to a Capricorn talk about against the establishment.
But let's establish ourselves. And we can use a few examples here on my personal level before we get out this full moon chart and do a little bit of a read for that. And how you have also.
Just to let you know, I have just 5 minutes because I have to go
Well,
pick.
I'll say it very quickly then. Each and everybody personally have been forced into lockdown since the spring last year. And what we have seen is actually that this has been giving people the opportunity, if they've lost their jobs, to feed into things that they enjoy, to feed into spending more time with themselves, to go into invest in things that bring them joy, whether that's wisdom, whether that's becoming an astrologer by doing one of your courses because they're fantastic, whether it's actually going in to learn some kind of revolutionary wisdom, which is like aromatherapy, gives them a skill that they can enjoy. Maybe they just built farmland and just decided that actually they're going to invest in fruits and vegetables. Well, this is a very great way to honor our own sovereignty, and this is what's being asked of us as we disengage from any systems that aren't for us. Now, Lada, I'm going to suggest that as I share this chart quickly for you guys, we can have a little look and how this all ties this into a beautiful bow. We've only got a couple of minutes, but what I can do is I can come back if you would like, and I can actually do readings for each of the 12 signs on this chart, maybe next week, after you've got the opportunity to go into this and see the deeper meaning of this, what this means for us all as humanity. And I can go through each horoscopes of the 12 signs. Is that something you'd like to do, Lada?
That might be awesome.
We'll see how it goes. We'll see how this video is received. If you guys watching would like that to be the case, give it a thumbs up. I'm really grateful to be able to share with you on Lada's platform, because you guys are the best astrology audience that I have ever experienced. I'm grateful for this opportunity. So, right, I needed to get that sorted in the background. I was all doing filler there while I was getting this chart ready. And so thank you very much for your patience. Here we go. This is what we're building towards on the 24th. It's a full moon at that same degree. If you've been paying attention, you'll notice that the eclipse in 2019 was at 3 degrees of Capricorn. The nodes were also there on the lockdown, and this is the full moon for it. So each of these recent situations, inclusive of that one back in 1284, which is at 4 degrees. Actually, the 4 degrees one was actually at 2019 as well, so we remember that. So basically, it's all within the same margin. It's all right there in that first few degrees of Capricorn, which is very central to the solstice. It's very central to our cross of matter. And so this is about a reinforcement of letting go. Full moon's always, as you say, a conclusion. It's the letting go of our emotional protocols with regards to the governmental affairs. Venus is opposing Pluto in this chart. It was actually the days before that Venus actually makes that opposition. Jupiter goes retrograde just before the sun makes ingress into Cancer in the build to this full moon. And Mercury stations direct just the day before the full moon as well. So this is very interesting, especially as Saturn rules Capricorn and it's moved all the way through to Aquarius at this stage. It's in harmony with the now stationed Mercury and Rahu. We need new information. But what gives this information substance is the opportunity for us to choose with our feelings, which is our internal guide. It is actually our matriarchal map, because when we go with our systems, it's showing us love like no other can. It's your connection to source. Everything, all of these planetary archetypes, all of our relationships with everybody is all with a reflection of our interior conditioning. And so if we're going to support ourselves, if we're going to sustain ourselves in a way that feels appropriate, we must check in with our feelings. Venus there, the sun there in Cancer, with the moon opposite in Capricorn. This is two oppositions. Eventually that sun's going to come and oppose Pluto, just as Mars and Venus and Mercury will oppose Pluto also. This is more fallout. As more people revolutionize, as more people come into recognizing themselves and choose alternative ways to honor themselves, we're going to be disengaging from systems that don't serve us, whether they're schools, whether they're banks, or whether they're televisions that tells your vision for you. We're coming in to recognize that a vision is something that is felt. And this is really changing the vibration which we see dealt, because it is our interior condition which sets the standard for the scene all around us. It's very Saturnian, right? And this is a great opportunity for us. We see that this new moon sextiles Jupiter. We're letting go of belief systems. The collective, the whole lot of us are letting go of subconscious manipulation, which was glamorized over us. These are very magical tricks that they play in the media and the movies. Venus is trining Neptune. Not everything's clear at this time, but more and more of us are feeling beyond illusions, which are void of lights. And so we get clarity when we recognize our senses. And this is what the potential offers us at this time. Mars radically squaring Uranus, break free, come into this alternative nature of genius, which is actually the original. It's our ancestors, it's our root, which is fertile for change. And so it's very exciting. South Node working its way through Jupiter's sign. Again, that's the 12th house. We are dismantling these belief systems. We're gaining clarity and we are empowering ourselves. It's not to say that it's going to be fixed by the 25th, the day after the full moon. These things take time. They're dedications, they're devotions. But by the time that we get all of these retrogrades finished that we're about to live through, by the time that we actually make it through the Capricorn season, when we've got Venus retrograde around Pluto, and we come towards the end of that Capricorn season, we're going to have all of these planets moving direct. Saturn, Pluto and Jupiter, they're going to be coming out of their shadow phases. And we're going to be finding that the hard work that we do between now and then, disengaging and coming into a more inclusive emotional connection with ourselves and one another, means that we're empowered to move into the year of the tiger. This is year of the ox. It's about clearing the way and going after what you're guided and what you feel impulsed to move towards. So go after your joy. Why? Because joy is who you are. Thank you for listening. I'm very grateful for Lada. Thank you for holding space. This has been brilliant.
Thank you so much, Philip. So as a conclusion, you're saying that this can, maybe I can try to summarize and you can say if I understood it correctly, because there was so much information. You like, you're Virgo, you're Mercury in Sagittarius, aren't you?
Yes, Mercury Uranus at 23 degrees of Sag.
Yeah, because like when you talk, like you bring so much knowledge, information, like Mercury in Sagittarius, like you go into philosophy. And so I'm going to summarize that to ask you if I understood correctly. This big gathering of planets in Capricorn on the same degree that there was an eclipse 800 years ago in the 12th, 13th century. It started the banking system, the big grab of power, Capricornian corporation. It was with the North Node. And now, for the first time in 800 years, in the last year and a half, there again, all those planets gathered together with the South Node, which starts meaning like the end of this cycle gradually, this empowering those structures. Of course, the exact time of the lockdowns, the new moon squared that eclipse as well. So maybe it's some kind of a, you know.
One major thing which I have to bring in and to close as well is that actually this is a big world reset for our belief systems and our cosmology. Back then, we had a different cosmological account of affairs, and the astrologers that told me would say that we would live as the center, like Earth wasn't following the sun. And this is very important for our religions, which tell the story of following the sun, Jesus Christ. And this is like a physical representation. This is a patriarchal representation of having to follow a leader. But the thing is, stars, Leo, you Leos, stars teach us well because they create and follow their own course. And of course, if we are learning we're all stars, it means that we don't put other people first. We put ourselves first because love loves self first, and then they pour their love into everybody else around them. This is the Leo energy. And so when we put ourselves back into the centaur position, you know, like Sagittarius is a centaur, like Chiron is a centaur, like any spirit incarnated is actually a spirit incarnated into the center of their experience. And Saturn is the author, and the author teaches and writes their story and leads from the center. They don't devalue themselves by putting themselves second. Yes, we can do things for other people, it's brilliant, but actually this is about leadership. And we know that we're all leaders here. Like we look across at our leaders, the other stars, like we use them to plot our course, but we don't follow them directly because we're all unique. It's our uniqueness is our greatest value, and we aren't ever going to be made a replica of. Nobody can come and do things the way that you are doing them. And they might try and copy, but it's going to be a knockoff. So you may as well try and do it your own way and use the best bits that work for you. I mean, like as an astrologer, I see how astrologers and I say, oh, that's working, that's great. I'm not sure if this bit's for me though. They're doing that, that's great. I'm not sure if that bit's for me. So I use the bits that's great and integrate them into my own unique expression. And so this cosmological reset is actually seeing that astrology can be recognized as an interdimensional template to recognize ourselves as multi-dimensional frequency beings. And this is very high echelon, very high vibration. As
Sorry, how
we
does it tie with the full moon? I'm not sure I always understand you. You're quite philosophical, so I'm very simple-minded. I like straight, direct, and I'm not sure I understand how some of the things you talk tie in with the full moon, or you're talking
Yes,
about something else now.
I'm talking about how when we're engaging with cosmology, um, since 1284, they had a cosmology which we was put ourselves in the center. But because they did a few different cosmological shifts, they say they sent men to the moon, they said they had dinosaurs, and we had evolution, which is very disempowering to our consciousness. If we could so easily be wiped out by asteroids, if we actually came just by some kind of evolutionary happenstance, rather than actually being chosen, it makes people not want to choose themselves. It makes people want to go and work for Woolworths. I know you used to live in England, Woolworths is long gone. But like, you know, these corporations, these companies which are losing the individuality of the being. However, when there's a
I think
farm,
that the change of the philosophy, like the Earth is, you know, the Earth is not flat. It's we're just a small, tiny planet, and so on. That's what also helped this kind of enslavement of humanity, let's say. Yeah. Okay.
100%. The ball was what? What can you do with a ball? Just like media people can do with a story, you spin a ball. And so I'm not asking that we all change our cosmology. I'm just saying that we put ourselves back in the driver's seat here and put ourselves back into the center of our own experience. And this is very empowering. I mean, like Earth is meant to be the middle planet, but if we actually put it actually is not following a sun, and at the sun serving us, that we can come back into our own self-service and then share our love that comes from overflowing, because we end up being depleted when we put ourselves second. But then the opportunity to recognize that this energy, like, it's beyond sexuality, but that the sperm made it first. Each one of us came first originally, but at the same time, in with regards to the creation story, before they said let there be light or let there be love, there was just void, there was just clarity. So the backdrop is clarity, void of light, translucence. And this is
Thank
what
you
we're
so much, Philip. I really have to run now because I'm going. You're fascinating to listen to. Sorry, I just had 1 hour today, but
You've been brilliant, Nada.
thank you for
Thank
the
you.
exciting presentation of the new moon, full moon in Capricorn, and looking forward to hear more from you. Your channel is so people can follow it. What was the name of your
People
channel?
can check out my channel. I've got you coming on, intending the show in a few weeks to do an interview. I've got over 100 interviews with fellow astrologers, some of which may recognize. It's called Unifying Perspectives. I put a video up every day. And so that's great. And I'm very excited to be able to share with you. Thank you so much for having
Thank
me on
you
board,
so much,
Lara.
Philip. Very interesting for this. Let's see how everything unfolds. It's.
Well, yeah, what
I
I
think
would
the
like to say is
message is quite positive. Have a wonderful
there is
day.
a positive side. It's imperative that we say that these things, I'm not just a positive astrologer, I'm a realist too, but like, so there are going to be people that still choose banks and governments and things like that, but as a star, as a leader, we can each wield our influence by choosing ourselves, and that makes a difference. When each one of us chooses ourselves, we are the messenger of the gods, and other people can awaken to that. So congratulate yourself for choosing healthy, for choosing what is going to bring you sovereignty, and I think that's brilliant. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Likewise.